Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ricardo Mackenzie, and welcome to the Standing Committee on the Premier and Constitutional Matters. I'm going to take off my mask so you can hear me clearly. My name is Ricardo Mackenzie, and welcome to the public hearings of the Standing Committee on the Premier and Constitutional Matters on the Western Cape First Amendment Bill. I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, then I'll introduce the rest of the team, starting on my far left.
Dankie voorsitter, Dylan Mitchell.
Thank you. I introduced.
Thank you, Chair. It's Cameron Dugmore.
Thank you, Chair. It's Khalil Brankes.
Thank you. I'll ask our colleagues online to introduce themselves as well.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and members and those in Saldanha Bay. I am Regan Allen.
Good afternoon, Chairperson, members and guests. My name is Wendy Philander.
Thank you. On my right-hand side, I have my colleague Wasima, who's also working with us on this standing committee. Today, we are here for the public hearing on the Western Cape First Amendment Bill. We will get a presentation later on from the officials on this particular bill, and then we will give an opportunity for members of the public either here or those online to make the necessary submissions. Just for the record, the particular bill was advertised in the Argus, Die Burger, Bukani, the George Herald, the Mossel Bay Advertiser, the Knysna and the Platte Herald, all the mayor's offices, the municipal offices, the speakers, the Mort centers, the Tusong centers, the community development workers and universities in the Western Cape. The Public Outreach and Education Unit also informed the stakeholder database in the Western Cape, and we also used DASA, which is a public platform, and with an estimated 1 million stakeholders where this was advertised, this particular bill. I'm going to ask our colleagues from the department, I see both of them are sitting on the far left, to introduce themselves, and then we'll immediately start with a presentation by both the respective departments, and then we'll give an opportunity for question and answers and for input on this particular matter. Without further ado, colleagues, I'm not sure we agreed who's going to go first in the far left.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Good afternoon, members of the public. Ayub Mohammed from the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning.
Good afternoon. I'm Clara Williams from the Department of the Premier.
You will go first.
Yes.
Are you waiting, Clara? Okay. Before you start, I just want to make sure that members online, can you see the presentation?
Yes, Chairperson, thank you.
Okay, thank you. You can continue.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairperson, members of the Standing Committee, members of the public. I'm Clara Williams. I'm a state law advisor in the Department of the Premier Legal Services. My presentation will deal with the technical amendments to the Constitution of the Western Cape, the Provincial Constitution, and my colleague will deal with the amendments relating to the Commissioner for the Environment. The Constitution, the National Constitution, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, was assented to in December 1996 and commenced in 1997. And a year later, the Western Cape Provincial Constitution also commenced. Section 3.3 of the Provincial Constitution states that the provisions of the Provincial Constitution must not be interpreted as conferring any legislative or executive authority on the Western Cape, which is inconsistent with the National Constitution. The National Constitution has been amended 17 times since it commenced in 1997. However, the Provincial Constitution has not yet been amended. So the technical amendments aim to align the Provincial Constitution with the amended wording in the National Constitution. The purpose of the bill is twofold. Firstly, to amend the provincial constitution to align it with the national constitution, as I said, and secondly, to repeal the provisions relating to the Commissioner for the Environment. The proposed technical amendments to the provincial constitution will align it with the relevant amendments to the national constitution to avoid inconsistencies and difficulties with interpretation. This slide indicates which sections of the provincial constitution are proposed to be amended and what their national constitution equivalents are. The amendments relate to membership of the provincial parliament, calling dates for elections, money bills, intervention in local government, taxes and loans. In addition, expressions used in the national constitution will be taken over in the provincial constitution and certain phrases in the isiXhosa text will be replaced. The slides that follow compare the wording of the national constitution as amended on the left to the wording of the provincial constitution if the bill is enacted on the right. Wording that's indicated in square brackets and in bold is proposed to be deleted, and all the wording that's underlined is proposed to be inserted. And you will see, if you compare the wording in the two blocks, that the proposed amendments will align it with the wording on the left that's also in bold. The proposed amendment to Section 15 of the Provincial Constitution will align it with Section 106 of the National Constitution and will result in a person losing membership of the provincial legislature if he or she ceases to be a member of the political party that nominated him or her as a member of the legislature. Section 106 of the National Constitution was amended in 2003 and again in 2009. The proposed amendment to Section 17 of the Provincial Constitution will align it with Section 108 of the National Constitution. It provides that a proclamation calling and setting dates for an election may be issued before or after the expiry of the term of a provincial legislature. Section 108 of the National Constitution was amended in 1999. The proposed amendment to Section 30 of the Provincial Constitution will align it with Section 120 of the National Constitution by extending the definition of a money bill. Section 120 of the National Constitution forms part of Chapter 6, which deals specifically with provinces. The proposed amendment is identical to the 2001 amendment to the National Constitution. The proposed amendments to Section 49 of the Provincial Constitution will align it with Section 139 of the National Constitution. The National Constitution was amended in 2003, and these sections deal with intervention in local government. It's quite a lengthy section, so I will just go through the slides or show the slides. The proposed amendments to Section 59 of the Provincial Constitution will align it with Section 228 of the National Constitution by simply deleting references to the term tax basis. The National Constitution was amended in 2001 as the phrase had no definite meaning in the context it appears in. The proposed amendments to Section 63 of the Provincial Constitution will align it with Section 230 of the National Constitution. The National Constitution was amended in 2001 and the obligation to repay loans for current expenditure within 12 months was deleted. Lastly, certain expressions used in the National Constitution are proposed to be taken over in the Provincial Constitution, namely references to the Chief Justice instead of to the President of the Constitutional Court, and correct references in the Xhosa text to the Afrikaans language. The repeal of sections 71 to 77, which deal with the Commissioner for the Environment, will be dealt with by my colleague, Mr. Ayub Mohammed, and he will do his presentation after I have finished mine. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon. Goeiedag Mulweni. As Clara said, this presentation deals with the amendment, it deals with the appeal of the Commissioner for the Environment, which is contained in section 71 of chapter 9 of the Provincial Constitution, or the Constitution of the Western Cape. Okay. The presentation that follows will cover the background and the status of the Commissioner, the history of the amendment process to date, the function and the duties of the Commissioner from the Constitution of the Western Cape, the response to the duties and functions in the context of the prevailing legislative regime, what the Commissioner will cost, and a conclusion. There are copies of the presentation in the folders that has been handed out. The presentation that you're going to be seeing on the screen is not exactly the same because it's an abridged version of what you have in the pack, but I will refer to the sections in the presentation as we go along. Okay. So in terms of the background and the status of the Commissioner, Section 71 of the Provincial Constitution establishes the Commissioner for the Environment. Section 72 to 77 deals with the powers and the functions of the Commissioner and related aspects. Now, the Commissioner is binding on the provincial legislature and the executive unless relevant sections are repealed. And the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning is of the opinion that, that these sections can be repealed for the reasons that I will present as we go along. So we're dealing with the background in terms of the presentation that you have in front of you. Now, the Provincial Constitution may be amended if it is determined that the Commissioner is no longer desirable. And as I said, the Department of Environmental Affairs is of the opinion that it is undesirable for the following reasons. The duplication of roles and responsibilities, that it will consume scarce state resources, and it will not address any governance gaps. So then we go on to the history of the Commissioner to date. Now, in 2001, and the Provincial Constitution was assented to in 1997. So 3 years later, in 2001, a draft bill for the Commissioner for the Environment was produced that included an organogram, a definition of the environment, which was exactly the same as the definition as contained in the National Environmental Management Act of 1998. And it also defined environmental administration as any action, omission, or decision by an organ of state which significantly affects the environment in an adverse manner. In 2009, an external legal opinion was obtained on the desirability of appointing a Commissioner. That opinion confirmed the legislative law reforms that had occurred, and it also indicated that an amendment to the Constitution should not be taken lightly, and that consideration would be given to amend the Constitution to appoint a Commissioner when it is appropriate or desirable. It was never defined when it will be appropriate or when it will be desirable. Since 2010, the amendment of the Constitution of the Western Cape proceeded on that basis. And then 5 years later, in 2015, we undertook further analysis which confirmed the duplication of the legislation that still exists, and the bill was withdrawn. I'll speak to that legislation in the next section. In 2019, the 5th Provincial Parliament, which is the parliament which preceded this, members that are sitting in front of us, dissolved, and that bill lapsed. And since, so the Commissioner has never been appointed. 5 administrations, the Commissioner has never been appointed. And in the current Provincial Parliament, has however introduced the bill with a provision to repeal Section 71 to 77, and that is the public hearings that we are here. And that's the reason why we are here. So what were the functions and the duties of the Commissioner? Now, according to the Constitution, the Commissioner for the Environment must monitor. I'm going on to section, it's now section 3 of the presentation that you have in front of you. According to the Constitution, the Provincial Commissioner for the Environment must monitor urban and rural development, which may impact on the environment, must investigate complaints in respect of environmental administration and must recommend a course of action to any provincial organ of state or municipality whose activities has been investigated by the Commissioner. Now, the Commissioner must act in accordance with the principles of cooperative governance and intergovernmental relations. The Commissioner can have additional powers and functions as may be provided for in provincial legislation, and currently there is no provincial legislation that exists. And then where the Commission has made recommendations to a provincial organ of state, that organ of state must report to the Commissioner on its actions within a reasonable time frame, and the Commissioner must monitor the implementation of its recommendations by provincial organs of state, only provincial organ of state according to the Constitution, not municipalities. The Commissioner must report annually to the Provincial Parliament. It must also submit its recommendations to the Provincial Parliament, and it can report to the Provincial Parliament at any other time. Who appoints the Commissioner? The Premier appoints the Commissioner by the Premier appoints the Commissioner that is nominated by a committee of Parliament, and that nomination must be supported by a vote of 60% of the Provincial Parliament. So 60% of the Provincial Parliament must support the nomination for the Provincial Commissioner before the Premier can appoint, and civil society must be involved in that nomination process. The Commissioner is appointed for a period of 3 years, which is renewable once, so 6 years in total. The Commissioner may be removed from office on the grounds of misconduct, incapacity, or incompetence. And this can only happen if found to be so by another committee of the Provincial Parliament, and a resolution of the Provincial Parliament calling for the Commissioner's removal with a supporting vote of at least 2/3 of the members of the Provincial Parliament. And then the Premier may suspend the Commissioner whilst a parliamentary process into the conduct of the Commissioner is underway, and the Premier must remove the Commissioner if Provincial Parliament so decides. So if that committee of the Provincial decides and it has been voted, 66% of the Parliament decides so, then the Premier can remove the Commissioner. Going on to part 4 of the presentation, which is the response to the duties and the functions of the Commissioner. Now, since 1998, and we heard that the Constitution was assented to in 1997, and 1998 was also the year that the National Environmental Management Act came into being, there is numerous laws with extensive subordinate legislation aimed at integrated environmental management and governance, spatial and land use planning, urban and rural development, and intergovernmental coordination and administrative oversight has been enacted. And it is our contention that there is an overlap and a duplication of the roles and functions of the Commissioner as provided for in national and provincial legislation. If one looks at that slide, you will see the middle row, the middle column, pre-1997 is the legislation which existed before 1998 when the National Environmental Management Act came into being and also the Constitution of the Western Cape. So prior to that, there was only the Nature Conservation Ordinance, there was the Environment Conservation Act, and we did have the promulgation of the EIA regulations that was promulgated under ECA. There was also the Public Protector Act, and we are in the planning side of things, we had the Land Use Planning Ordinance since 1985, and then in 1998, like I said, NEMA and the Constitution came into. So there was very limited laws relating to the environment, if one has a regard for that slide. However, since 1998, numerous statutes related to the environment has been promulgated. Most notably, like I said, is NEMA and the specific Environmental Management Act, such as the Protected Areas Act, the Biodiversity Act, Air Quality Act, Integrated Coastal Management Act, Waste Management Act. And there was also the Water Act, the Promotion of Administrative Information Act, and Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. In terms of planning legislation, the Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act and the Western Cape Land Use Planning Act has come into being, which has replaced LUPO. And in terms of governance, there's also the PAJA and the PAIA, which I mentioned, and there's also the Public Protector Act, which has come into being. There's also draft legislation in the pipeline, dealing with environmental management matters. Then this includes the National Environmental Management Laws Amendment Bill, the draft Western Cape Biodiversity Bill, which is going to replace the Nature Conservation Ordinance, the Protection and the Development of Agricultural Resources Bill, and the draft Integrated Planning Framework Bill, which deals with integrated planning across the spheres of government. There's also a range of strategic policies governing the environment, as shown. There's a series of white papers and strategies and policy documents which now address environmental management, spatial planning, and land use management, rural and urban development in the country and in the Western Cape. So in terms of the functions, if you look at the functions of specifically of the functions of the Commission of the Environment, one of the functions, there is the Commission for Environment, and it's our contention that this function is currently catered for in the National Environmental Management Act, which provides for various fora and structure to coordinate and promote the integrated environmental management, such as advisory committees. There's a suite of such bodies that have been created. In addition, the National Water Act creates catchment management agencies, water use associations, and water tribunals. And SPLUMA also creates municipal planning tribunals and a decision-making system within the municipality. The Western Cape Land Use Planning Act, specifically of 2014, requires the Provincial Minister for Environmental Affairs and Development Planning to monitor, amongst other things, urban and rural development and the protection of biodiversity, and a series of other matters like water and energy, climate change, housing, disaster management. That is in terms of planning legislation. Now, in terms of that, the Commissioner must ensure the conservation of the environment in the Western Cape and give attention to the need to balance the goals of environmental conservation and sustainable development. This function is currently catered for as follows. The National Environmental Management Act establishes sustainable development principles that is applicable to all organs of state. Environmental and planning legislation creates a regulatory framework for listed and specified activities which may impact on the environment. NEMA provides for environmental management frameworks, while planning legislation provides for spatial development frameworks at the regional and provincial level. And at the municipal level, there's the IDPs and also the spatial development, municipal spatial development frameworks. That the Commissioner is independent and impartial. This function is currently catered for as follows. In terms of independence and impartiality, the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act applies to all organs of state involved in decision making. Administrative actions are reviewable if it is taken inter alia because of the unauthorized or unwarranted dictates of another person or body, or if the administrator was biased or is reasonably suspected of bias. So PAJA creates the framework in which decision making must take. Then the public protector can also investigate the conduct of any organ of state, irrespective of the sphere of government, where there is alleged or suspected to be improper actions or have resulted in any impropriety or prejudice. Now, the public protector must report on that conduct and take appropriate remedial action. That the Commissioner must monitor urban and rural development which may impact on the environment. This function is currently catered for as follows. NEMA requires the compilation of state of environment reports and environmental implementation plans, and LUPA, the Land Use Planning Act of the Western Cape, requires the Provincial Minister to monitor regional and urban regional planning and development, and also urban and rural development. That is included in the legislation that exists currently. That the Commissioner must investigate complaints in respect of environmental administration. This function is currently catered for as follows. The NEMA creates the framework for conciliation and arbitration, and NEMA also creates the Environmental Management Inspectorate, or the Green Scorpions, to deal with environmental transgressions. Further, that the Commissioner must investigate environmental administration. This is also catered for in that the Commissioner is only supposed to investigate actions of provincial organs of state which significantly affect the environment in an adverse manner. However, NEMA requires that actions must be assessed prior to the implementation in terms of Section 73 and 74, and that is in terms of the NEMA EIA regulations. So the actions of organs of state must be assessed before they are acted upon. Now, where significant pollution or degradation to the environment occurs, Section 28 of NEMA allows for the issuing of directives and establishes the duty of care principle. And this exercise is exercised by the Green Scorpions or the Environmental Management Inspectorate, and NEMA also allows for private prosecutions by interested parties or groups of persons who may apply to court for such. Furthermore, there is the Western Cape Monitoring and Support of Municipalities Act that empowers the Provincial Minister of Local Government to investigate any maladministration, fraud, corruption, or any serious malpractice, and where a municipality cannot or does not fulfill a statutory obligation. And then again, the Public Protector may, in terms of the Public Protector Act, investigate any alleged maladministration in connection with the affairs of government at any level or any sphere. That the Commissioner must act in accordance with the principles of cooperative governance and intergovernmental relations. This function is also catered for as follows. NEMA allows for environmental management cooperation agreements to coordinate and harmonize environmental plans, policies, programs, and the decisions of various departments that exercise functions that may affect the environment. Furthermore, the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act provides for the establishment of intergovernmental coordination structures across all spheres of government. Now, particularly in the environmental sector, there is the MIN-MEC, which comprises of the National Minister, the MECs, municipal EXCO members responsible for environment and the related SOEs. There is the MIN-TEC, comprising the DG of Environmental Affairs and provincial HODs and municipal officials dealing with the environment and the SOEs, and MIN-TEC comprising of various working groups. And then there's also Provincial Parliament, which already exercises oversight in terms of the PFMA and oversight over different portfolios assigned to its members and committees. And then finally, it is important to note that the Commissioner has no jurisdiction to investigate any matters which do not constitute a provincial competence, such as water, forestry, fisheries, parliament, etc. And it is also important to note that competence over municipal matters is unclear, as there is no reporting obligations placed on municipalities, even though the Commissioner can investigate municipalities. There's nothing in the Constitution that deals with that. If we move on to the next section, which is section 5, that deals with the costing. Now, so what will the Commissioner cost? In the 2001 organizational design was extremely limited if you compare that to the Western Cape Police Ombudsman and the Children's Commissioner who have been appointed. They both have a staff complement of about 12, with the heads being at the Deputy Director General level. And the original organization design only for the Commissioner was 1 Deputy Director, 1 assistant, 2 assistant directors, and 1 administration clerk. So using the Children's Commission and the Police Ombudsman as a norm, the cost of establishing the Commissioner for the Environment amounts to about 12 million rand in year 1, which includes a startup cost of about 3 million rand, 9.9 million in year 2, and 10 million in year 3. So in conclusion, it is our opinion that national and provincial legislation already provides adequately for the protection of the environment, i.e. those enabling provisions already exist. And the filling of the vacancy is not desirable because it would involve an overlap and duplication of the roles and functions provided for in national and provincial legislation. It will not address any governance gaps that we've been identified, and it will consume scarce state resources in terms of the budget and the costing associated with it. On the ombud-like functions, and this is an important point, the issues raised during previous consultations are not issues that the Commissioner for the Environment would have the power to deal with. The Commissioner would not have any power to investigate any complaints against national government or private entities. And the Commissioner would not be a decision-making body regarding environmental authorizations, nor would it be an appeal body. And for those reasons, we thank you for the presentation, and it is our contention that the Commission is undesirable. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our colleagues. Sorry, Mr. Ayub, are you done?
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, you may have a seat. We're going to open the opportunity for questions from members of the public. either by show of hands so we can recognize you. If you want to have any questions for our colleagues, and then we'll take it from there. If you want to make any input, I saw Mr. Maxwell there. Gentleman number 2. Thank you. You can hand over the mic.
That's fine. I can hold it. Thank you very much. My name is Maxwell Moss. I am born and bred in Saldanha, probably the most beautiful town in the Western Cape. From the presentation that we got now, I got a question to ask, which I think is very important. You say there that the Environment Commissioner should monitor planning and development and urban and rural development. The simple question that I have is, who is doing that monitoring right now and currently? And what powers does that person or body that monitors these matters, what does he has? Because can I continue or not? Can I just only ask questions? Because my view is that Environment Commissioner will obviously assist a great lot with any environment issues that we have. I want to give you an example. In 1986, even before the environment laws or NEMA was passed in 1998, we here in Saldanha, we had 2 lobby groups, one in favor of the establishment of Saldanha Steel, which is now ArcelorMittal, and another group opposed to it. Obviously, the group opposed to it was the environment lobby, and the lobby in favor of it was the business lobby and so on. Now, if one look at what's happening right now at Saldanha Steel, the place looks filthy. There's dams around the ArcelorMittal, which is very hazardous, and there's no much one can do to it. Now, if you have an environment commissioner and one can engage him, then you have somebody or a body where you can go to with your complaints. I'm referring especially to ordinary, poor, working class people who don't have the resources, financially and legal, to show their views and to challenge these views. To me, a government that does not see that environment is a priority does not care for its people. It's internationally known that when it comes to environment, it is so important. I mean, we've seen what's happening with France, the last environment, whatever you call it, it was in France, right? And even America was eventually persuaded, which is the biggest polluter, okay, to toe in line, right, with the Biden presidency. Yeah, other examples that we have in Saldanha. If you go to the squatter camp and an area that we call the Tweefer Track, and it's normally poor people who can't afford. There's an open mine there, mining sand and dust, and they don't care about the community at all. They just continue to mine, and as if it is a foreign area within, adjacent to where people live. Now, the communities has been coming to many people Now, I'm a former member of parliament and I'm a community activist. They even came to me, and it's difficult to pinpoint them where they should go to. Okay. Now, if there's an environment commissioner, obviously you can go to the environment commissioner. And in fact, if I look at the functions here of that environment commissioner, he should actually be given more powers to perform duties much more than what is currently envisaged, what his duties should be. So I want to repeat what I said earlier. A government that does not see the environment as a priority doesn't care for its people. Look what's happening in the Western Cape. Every time when there's a storm, there's warnings that people should stay indoors, or people should look at certain things. You must clean your gutters and all those kinds of things. And all these damages and people who get killed, who die as a result of these storms, it's happening where poor people live, not where the rich people live. Now, it's also clear to for a provincial commissioner, environment commissioner. Perhaps maybe the rich people have lobbied you to the extent, and they convinced you there's no need for that. Where will ordinary, poor, working class people go to if they have those issues? I gave you an example that we have here in Saldanha. I think I should stop there for now because there's another matter I wanted to raise. Should I continue?
You can raise the other matter, then we conclude with you before the department responds. Thank you.
I was born here in Saldanha. We got a big fishing company here called Sea Hours. And people, I think it's now in operation for 68 years, 8 years, 57 or 8 years. Now, we have generations of people who used to work there. And our view in Saldanha is very clear. We must preserve the environment, especially in fishing towns, which is very sensitive for when it comes to polluted, any kind of pollution. Now, we believe that a company like that should be protected for communities for generations to come. Now, the environment commissioner is the first person where poor people can go to. And with additional powers, there's such a lot that would be able to be done so that poor people can have a hearing, right? And not only be looked at as if I can show you dump sites in this country, in Cape Town, where so-called black people, African or colored people live. A good example is the one in Delft. There's a dump site which they closed, right? With sand and so on. And who stays there? Colored black people, not the rich white people who are being protected. These are the issues we should look at. Thank you for now.
Thank you. Can the department just respond to the question that was raised, but the input is noted? I think the question was around the duties, the extra duties. Yeah. I think let me actually a better point. Let me take another question because Mr. Max gave some input, obviously, but the note that, and I'll take if you can just introduce yourself, sir, then we'll take that question as well. You can just sanitize the mic and just give it to the gentleman. Thanks.
sanitize the mask.
Sanitize the mic. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. Thanks. He did. Yeah.
I'm a senior citizen. If I get COVID from here, I will kill you myself in my death. Thank you.
We'll make sure you get the vaccines if you're over 60.
Thank you, leadership. The one thing I cannot understand, there's this particular constitution which has to be amended and remove, in actual fact, not amending, it's removal of the environmental commissioner, right? So now the reason given is it does not make sense to me as a person. One, it's because the Constitution itself does not go around and say, this thing is wrong and that thing is right, right? It just gives guidelines. But if there's a commissioner and there's a warm body in the term commissioner, and that warm body is able to identify shortcomings that are taking place in the country. Now, the other issue, Chair, is that I'm a natural environmentalist. You find executive environmentalists who went to school and they would want to come and school us about the environment, which now sometimes is conflict with regard to how do you preserve the environment. Now, because we respect the environment, we thought that keeping this thing, because it was a good thing for the Western Cape government to have environmental commissioner, because it need maybe more flesh to it. If it's run short, maybe the leg doesn't, it's just a bone, it doesn't have flesh, and then we put flesh on it rather than removing it. I'll tell you why. There are three bodies here. One, you find the ordinary citizen of South Africa. Two, you find the people that are running government. Three, you find the rich people that are developers. Now, the developers, when they want to dodge the laws that govern the country, they would go all the way and do funny things. Let's take Saldanha Steel, just mention it. It's closed because the environment was now have to be checked, and there's billions and billions of rent to give to the government to do that. So they decided that they closed down the company so that at the end, someone else, still on their behalf, would seem to be willing to start that company. And the government would say yes, and then forget about the environmental issue that affect the communities of Saldanha. Now, if the commissioner is removed, I just want to know, Uti, what will assist us as a country? What will assist the people of let's say, because we're in the Western Cape, what will it bring? It's nothing that we can get out of the removal of the environmental commissioner. That's why we want to see him there, but it must have powers vested in him. And I'm sure he's regarded as a Chapter 9 institution structure. So we want things that are adding value, man. We cannot sit and say something that was decided in 1997, it doesn't assist that, but it's assisting. I can tell you I was a councillor for 3 terms. A lot of development that should have taken place were stopped. I don't want to talk politics. They were stopped because in terms of environment, they don't meet 1, 2, 3. But when the previous opposition took over and become, then the same place, because we are not learned, né? We just natural environmentalists. Now the learned environments, they come say, you can build houses there. So, and if there's a commissioner, there can be a good mediation. So at least I can go to this commission and say, look, this is what we've been told by the officials of Saldanha municipality. Today they say something else about the same place. say build houses here because they can, but why the houses were not built before? It was because of environmental issues that they could not comply with. So those that are here today are leading this process. My plea to you is that just tell whoever, the politicians that have sent you, Mr. Pradel as principal chief and politically, tell him no, maybe it's a mistake that you are making, right? So this thing, it should be there because you just need to monitor whether it's doing the work that it's supposed to be doing instead of removing something that is beneficiary to us. Because if you get those big companies, they developers most of the time, they are a little bit scared because they know if they do that, it will be investigated and then someone will take them on. But if there's totally nothing that prevent them from doing whatever they want, then, and I give an example, so sorry, sir, through you. I want to make an example as a councillor. You sign an attendance register, you sit with the officials that are learned, and they tell you, I'm talking about Paternoster specific. They tell you, no, this is that and that and that, and then it's all right. Because our belief is that you cannot build houses in the beach. But if you go to Paternoster today, you find the houses in the same place that there cannot be houses there. There are now houses, right? Now, when I inquired this, I was told that I've signed the register. You see, Mr. Chairman, I've signed the register, and then I said, bring this signature of mine. I saw, and then I almost said I'm stupid, but I said, no, I don't have enough knowledge. I'm not a stupid. I did not have enough knowledge because we talked about this thing. We were assured by the officials, and then at the end of the day, there were developers who wanted to build houses there, and it's conflicting with the beach goers. Go to Langaban. They will tell you, no, there's a space for them. We develop here, but there will be a space for people and public. But when you go there, a space that this space between these two is big. So that would mean then we must now compact to the sea, and then when we are there, we must not make noise. We must not enjoy ourselves the way we used to enjoy ourselves, because now there are houses, and then Pastor John, this side, is angry because you're making a noise, you're a nuisance, and then you see the police and traffic cops, and then it's a noise nuisance here. Those are the issues that we should be looking at, and the commissioner should look at, not to say remove the commission on the basis of what? I'm sorry I said a lot of things, Chair. Maybe I made sense, maybe I did not make sense. Thank you very much.
This committee allows input from the public. That's why we're here. Thank you very much. Any further input or any questions? The gentleman at the back there, if you just introduce yourself. Thank you. Just sanitize the mic, please. Sir.
Thank you.
She will take your name. Thank you. You can continue, sir.
Thank you. My name is Andre Kruger. I'm an alderman, councillor. I was with the councillor who's just spoken now in that same council. I've been a councillor for 10 years now. I'm involved with the environment at our municipality, Saldanha Bay municipality, all the aspects of the environment. I chair the Saldanha Bay Water Quality Trust, which looks at the bay and the Langebaan Lagoon. I also chair the Municipal Coastal Committee, which looks at the whole west coast up until the Olifants River mouth. So I have a reasonable idea of what's going on in the environmental field. I think at present, we're sitting in a situation in our country where resources are extremely scarce. We haven't got budgets to fund positions which are being duplicated in the system somewhere. If we have a look at what was presented to us, 12 million a year is a lot of money that could be utilized in other ways to save the environment. I've been involved with many of the EIAs, and a lot of the statements were made about housing and other developments. The EIAs are professional people. They cannot be controlled. There are EIAs at the national level which I am doubtful with. And a lot of them are to do with mining. A present example is the car power, which is apparently going to come into our bay. So at national level, a lot of decisions have been made, which has no input from the other spheres of government into those decisions. We've gone through the process of public participation, but the decision has been made. I think that there are enough mechanisms in the system as it stands now. And what are those mechanisms? In this municipality, there is an environmental officer, a very competent environmental officer. She sits on all the committees that are engaged with the environment. She's also under a director where land use planning and all those things are done, so she gives the advice. And it's Nazima Duarte, a very competent person. There is an intergovernmental task team that was established on request of the Saldanha Bay Water Quality Trust, which was, for the last 3 years, busy in providing guidance to all environmental issues within the area of Saldanha Bay. Now, the intergovernmental task team has got all the spheres of government there. So if something is going to impact on the environment, how would it work in a municipality? Would they now go to province to indicate the commissioner to come and help us in the municipality? Or would they go to their councillor or even to the specific official involved in environment? Doesn't matter how much money they got, they've got those doors open to them. And that can be taken up through the system as presented to us now, up through the system up to provincial level. So in my opinion, what was presented gives me enough assurance that there are checks and balances in place and we can save 12 million rand, which we can utilize from the environment somewhere else. So that would be my input. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further input in the room? Is there someone online? Is there anyone online who wants to make some input? Nothing at the moment. There was quite a lot of input made, and we do value and appreciate your input. Thank you very much. I think, Mr. Ayap, is there anything that you wishes to state that you wanted to respond to during this period, or do you feel that there was just input? I think one of the things that I picked up was one. I think there was a concern raised about if I think what Mr. Moss raised it, where do communities complain to, if I can put it that way, if they have environmental issues, and if that is covered in the current legislation? Perhaps if you can speak to that. And I think the second point that our fellow colleague made was around the mediation role that this environmental commissioner could play, and perhaps speak to what the current, if there is a dispute relating to matters on the environment, where do individuals currently go, and what in the current legislation make provision for dispute mechanism. But obviously I notice input. And then the third gentleman raised the question perhaps around what is the role, if it does go ahead, what is the role of the commissioner, because they do have a current environmental officer. Sorry, Mr. Mitchell, your head is in the way. What is the role? And I think one of the provisions in the Act currently that you did speak to earlier on is there's no clear role for the commissioner when it comes to municipalities. And I think that is part of the reason. But if you can perhaps just address those 3 points and the other points that the public make for input, we'll obviously discuss it in committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the inputs. The one thing that was also picked up was who is currently monitoring urban and rural development, which was a direct question. The others we can regard as inputs, but I will respond to the issues which Mr. Chairperson, which you had raised. Is currently as we indicated in the slideshow, the Land Use Planning Act actually says that the provincial minister must monitor those aspects. So it is part, it has been catered for now in legislation. It's also part of the spatial development frameworks and the IDPs and the provincial spatial development frameworks and the regional spatial development frameworks. So when you do those development frameworks, obviously you have to look and you have to monitor what levels of development there are. When is development moving into the rural space? When is it in the urban space? So it is currently catered for specifically in the Land Use Planning Act of the Western Cape, and also in the various other pieces of planning legislation which exist. From environmental point of view, it's catered for environmental management frameworks and in the Sustainable Development Principles, which says you must take the following into consideration. So there is a specific space within legislation that deals with that. And it's not just the general which the commissioner has to do. And I think basically at the time when the commissioner was envisaged by the authors of the Constitution, that was a big lacuna because we had the land use planning ordinance. And at that time, province was the sole planning authority under the land use planning ordinance. Only provincial planning decisions were made at the provincial level, and it was appealed at the provincial level as well. So it was a totally different governance system which was in place as we have now. In terms of where communities can complain to, we've got the Environmental Management Inspectorate at the provincial level, and as indicated by the alderman over there, is that there's also an environmental officer, Nazima, who was a Green Scorpion with us in the province at one stage, and she's now working at the municipality. So there is where you can complain, and we've got the DNDP complaints hotline where you can email or you can phone, and that's on our website. We can make that available. But it is important to notice that the commissioner or us as a province, we can only investigate matters that is within the provincial mandate and that we have competency over. The constitutional dispensation in South Africa makes that quite clear, that we can only deal with that stuff. So things like mining, for example, we have no jurisdiction over. The one environmental management system that was put into place a few years ago makes the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy the sole responsibility, the sole responsible authority for mining. Province does not have a role to play over mining. We have made mining now in terms of the Land Use Planning Act regulations. Mining is listed, is one of the activities for which land use planning approval is required from province. So we've built it into there. But from the environmental point of view, then one environmental management system makes it clear that any complaints even related to mining must be dealt with the Department of Mineral Resources. So that is sort of the curtailing of the functions of the commissioner or even of the environmental affairs. So we do have, there is the Green Scorpions hotline, there is Parliament that can be complained to as well. Parliament has done oversight visit in terms of the Milkwood Forest in Skulphoek, in terms of the abalone on the Overstrand Coast example. So there's been a lot of oversight parliamentary visits as well, but then there's also the complaints that you can direct to the minister, to our head of department, to the Green Scorpions, and if it's within our mandate, we will act. Coming with NEMLA 4, which is the National Environmental Management Amendment Bill, which is currently in the National Parliament, and last year we had an engagement on that. Section 28 directives, which is the duty of care, and that is a general duty of care. If you see something that is causing significant harm to the environment or suspected to cause significant harm to the environment, that function will actually be devolved down to a municipal level. So the municipal environmental control officer with that delegation could actually then issue a Section 28 directive in the municipality. So that is also catered for. We're taking that level of duty down to a municipal level so that you don't only have to come to province or go to national to complain about environmental matters. That Section 28 directives will now be able to be issued by municipalities as well. So there is a definite role for the ECOs within municipalities, for like Saldanha Bay has, and we use them. We liaise with them. The bodies that has been established are all bodies which has been listed within the legislation, so the coastal committees, etc. And it's through those conduits that complaints can also be fed. In terms of mediation, now we do have lots of disputes around mediation, and Chapter 4 of NEMA actually makes provision for the minister for a mediation agreement. So the framework legislation is there already that you can use the National Environmental Management Act, Chapter 4, to appoint a mediator, to appoint an arbiter, to appoint a conciliator. The legislation is so far advanced compared to other legislation that it actually allows for that kind, and the minister would have to appoint that mediator and conciliator. And we've actually used it in the past. We have current mediation, we have current disputes that is also being dealt with through the provisions within the National Environmental Management Act. We don't need another. The point is we don't need another mechanism to deal with that. We first need to explore the mechanism which exists currently. So there is within NEMA Chapter 4 that deals with mediation, arbitration, and conciliation. That exists. And then also importantly, in terms of the Intergovernmental Framework Relations Act, if it's a dispute between two government organs of state, they need to solve that first. And it sets out a process to deal with that. And then the local government, the monitoring and support of the local government, the Local Government Monitoring and Support Act of the Western Cape, and that is a specific bill or a specific act in the Western Cape, which then allows the national minister, the provincial minister for local government, to deal with matters of dispute between a municipality if they're not doing their function. There we can have that as well. So besides the Constitution 136 interventions in terms of the Constitution, there is also the Local Government Monitoring and Support Act, which we can be used by the Minister of Local Government. And that's not restricted only to environmental management. That's restricted to the range of issues which affects local government. So I'll leave it at that, Mr.
Thank you very much. I'll allow for further question because we do have some time input, so you can go. Can you bring the mic closer, please? Thanks. Mr. Maxwell.
Yes, thank you very much. Since the Environment Commissioner is going to be a Section 9 institution, which is independent, with whom, which means you are free. There's no party political sides it looks at. Currently, when you go to the province and you go to the minister, if it's ANC or DA, currently it's DA, obviously they will support the view of the government of the day, the provincial government. But if you have the commissioner, environment commissioner, who's going to be independent, who look at things not from a political point of view, but look at things on merits. And as I said earlier, with the necessary powers vested in him, then obviously people will feel much more confident and free to go there too. So it's clear to me. I saw even in here, it was said that the Commissioner for Children, if you look at the country, then the Western Cape has the worst name when it comes to children. Children get lost, children got killed, children are being used by people with all the funny things, drug trafficking, child trafficking, all those kinds of things. It's rife in the Western Cape. And it took a very, very long time to convince the provincial government that there is a need for a commissioner for children. The same applies now. The Western Cape government prides itself to be clean and green when it comes to environment issues. Now, you're talking about 12 million rand, which will be spent to have environment commissioner. I mean, that money is not much if you look at the role the environment commissioner is supposed to play. It brings me back to my point I made much right in the beginning. A government that does not see the environment as important, as a priority, doesn't care for its people. it's very, very difficult for me that the department can argue where there can be an additional assistance and help on issues of environment, and to say no, we don't want an environment commissioner. It just boggles my mind. I need to be convinced because when you just to make an appointment with the authorities in the province, for example, how long will it take? You know how governments work. What satisfaction will you get out of it? So to me, it's just not. In fact, the Western Cape government is then practicing double standards by saying we are green, we are clean, we are for environmental, whether it's wind energy, clean energy, solar. But here you got somebody who would play a key and a huge role, and you put that person down, that commission. It's just mind-boggling for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Please sanitize the mic again. You need to bring the mic forward, sir.
He's very scared. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I did not introduce myself. My apologies. My name, my indigenous name is Nyanisile. My slavery name is Vivid, and the surname which also part of the slavery system is Mgoke, because you don't get same names. If you go to England, the king there of the prince there doesn't have a same name. It's only us here who got same names. But anyway, I'm not there. I am not convinced by the Manier who was speaking there now. We are very suspicious about what is happening in the land. One of the issues in the land was adopted was that any political party must declare who is funding you. Right? Now, I'm saying I'm coming from a council perspective. You've got an official who's very friendly with the developers. There's a lot of money in development. Just to develop something, you just have to cough up, maybe say 2 million rand. Let me cite an example, Sekunjalo. I know the media doesn't like Sef Iqba. They don't like him. So the company was closed.
Can I perhaps assist you quickly before you continue? The meeting has gone extremely well.
Yes.
It was unfair to make allegations against people that are not here to defend themselves.
No, I want to, when I'm saying Sekunjalo, ne?
Yeah.
Sekunjalo is belonging to Iqba.
Yeah, but I just want us to be mindful before you continue that
Okay,
the meeting has gone very well. Let's keep it that way. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the company itself. The company itself closed down based on the fact that they have to revisit the fish mill, which was environmentally a problem for the society of Saldanha, right? Then there was this particular gentleman I used to engage in the provincial government. I forgot his name, in the environment department. So we're saying that this is what they need to do. It's got all those scientific calculations that I cannot tell you about. But today the company is not there. Based on that, because that and that does not meet it. So he has to cough up something more than 6 million rand. The company then said, we will move away, we try to fundraise and get this money so that we've got the best fish meal. But the society, more especially the rich people, did not like the smell of a fish meal. So it was opposed. I don't know how far that process is. Now, the point I'm trying to bring home today is that we must remember when we talk that we talk about two people. You find rich people, you find poor people. How am I going to go and look around and looking for the minister of the MEC of Environment to help me, whereas I've got problem now? There's a development which took place, I'm sure, 5-10 years back here in the area where I'm staying. It's a piece of land we received from the public, was from the military land. And then the environment was right, everything is all right. When the houses were built, you find that there were certain things that were never mentioned in the environment. And then 2 or 3 houses have to be demolished and again to be rebuilt. That process is starting now. One of the houses is going to be built and then one of the house. That project, you find those families, 2 families, are sitting without a house based on the question of environment issue that was not properly checked. Now, the minister is still there on her office. No one was here, the minister say, or the premier of whoever said, no, this thing is wrong. Someone else. The lady that Twati, that she, the alderman speaking about them, I brought her every time and again in that particular project. But because it's from municipality, there are certain things they cannot do. You must remember, the Constitution allows municipality to do 1, 2, 3, but the legislative framework sometimes does not necessarily speak to the Constitution. So that's why we're saying, in terms of the Constitution of the land, we've got right to a healthy environment, not that will be determined by the premier or by the MEC, just because the Constitution allows us to do that. So I cannot report in the processes that are written there. I report to a specific person, one body, me and you, if you are assigned to do that job. Not the processes allows me to do that and that, and then, of which at the end of the day, I just end up fainting along the road and I haven't been where I want to be. So that's how the governance should be. It should be about people, not about the processes that the government of the politicians and put in place with the officials. It should be about people. If, like, let me make an example, sir. Yesterday, I'm talking about governance issues. Yesterday, I went to invite the mayor. So I said, I don't invite the mayor by who's the PA of the mayor. I'm inviting the mayor, so I have to speak to him. Then it takes you 20 minutes before you reach to a mayor. How much more to the minister in Cape Town? You have to drive here. The taxi is almost 300 Rand return to Cape Town. And then when you come there, you cannot meet this person because it's went that side and that side. And then when you ask him, then he will tell you that I'm running the province. I'm not running Saldanha. So please, just consider those things. And then I'll say it's fact. But because I'm not learned, remember that I don't have the in writing and all these things. But I tell you, we are very much careful about the environment, more than the people that are learned. People that are learned, they know how to bypass, and so that they're using law to oust us. I don't think it'd be fair. I think the very first writers of this particular thing, that there must be a commissioner, they were correct. What you need to look at now, leave all the NIMAs and everybody else, those processes. Think that what else powers can we vest in this particular commissioner so that he is able and even take more people. We cannot compare the life and the future of our children and great-grandchildren of ours determined by a piece of paper, by 12 million Rand. And it's not maybe, I don't know how factual is it, million Rand. It's just, we are scared that this is amount. There are a lot of money that are moving out of us. Looking at it, we don't know. There are a lot of monies that are running away from government. and then that don't come to do the job, you cannot therefore have money that you account for and say, no, you want it to go. What about the billions that are not accounted for? So please, Chair, I just want these people also to think about those things that they claim about 12 million rand, but they don't claim 12 billion rand. It's like what the Englishmen say, penny wise, pound foolish. Penny wise, pound foolish. It cannot work like that. We should be consistent in application of what is best for the South African society, not only in the Western Cape for that matter, but because we're in the Western Cape, what is good for the Western Cape? Look what happened in Table UCT, for instance. A lot of things happened. There's a lot of money that is gone up because environment, tourism is about environment, which is good. So if you close the beaches, so that means we are nothing in the country. We are now still compounded in location. These called our places are called locations. We want to move out of locations. We want to be part of South Africa. Please, I plead to you, sir. I think you are a very learned person. You must be a professor by profession. Just tell the minister that no, this thing is not going to work, man. It's not right for poorer people that don't have the power. You know, here we talk about power. If you got nothing like school, you're powerless. But if you got education, you are powerful that you will even abuse those that are your brothers and sisters. Thank you very much. And that was my last comment. I'm sorry if I touched into the things that I must not say. Sometimes you get emotional when people talking about environment as if we are not environmentalists sitting here. We're the best ones because we plant in our yards. That's an environment. You keep the environment good. So the developers are not worried about those things. They develop at the end of the day. They get the money. Then they say, you go and buy that place. And it's an expensive. So that's why I was a very active councillor. And then that title that Alderman said, I received the same title. I received that title before him. He's a youngster when it comes to council issues.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think you made a very important point. We need to do what's best for South Africa. I like that line. I'm going to use it in the future, quoting the alderman, the senior alderman from Saldanha. You want to say something? Is that? Both aldermen. Thank you, both aldermen, for joining us. So you wanted to...
I'm just a lot younger than he is. I'm well into my 70s, where Vivid is nowhere near that. We work together, and I agree that the people are the important issue here. It's the triangle between the people, which I call the community in its broader sense, the environment, and developing so that the people in the environment can survive. And if we can see that that triangle is in balance, as soon as one of those areas are out of balance, then we're going to have a problem. And I take what both Mr. Max and Vivid has said. I think those are important points. But I think we have got the processes in place. We must just utilize them correctly. And I think that the people running those processes must also be made aware of how important it is for them to take the community, not only the environment, the community also into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Well noted. We appreciate that input. I'm coming to now. Mr. Ibe, I don't think there's any question. I think there were just some important points that we need to take into account going forward. Sorry? Okay, let's allow before we come to Mr. Dagmo, Mr. Max.
Should one, like in my case, and Vivid Mkoke for that matter, should one object, say that we object the fact that the provincial government doesn't want to have or introduce an environment commissioner, or should we just have it as a talk show?
Well, I think your comments was particularly clear, so we note what you said. But you're welcome to put it on the record if you wish us to, yeah. But your comments in that regard was particularly clear.
Yeah, but I want to put it on the record.
We're welcome to put it so, yeah.
Thank you. Or should I? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I want to say, just as in the case with the child commissioner, which the province didn't want to establish, we are of the view, or I'm of the view, that an environment commissioner should be in place. There's a huge, important and big role that it has to play. So I reject the views of the government of the Western Cape that says they don't see a need for environment commissioner. It's a duplication and all that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So noted. But like I said, from the input, you can see if somebody were to come and listen to the tapes in the future and say, Ricardo, did you make Mr. Max object or support? I can say no, based on his input, we made that. Yeah. Mr. Dagmar, you wanted to prove?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and also to the aldermen and the very old man, Maxwell Moss, for your participation, and the other gentleman who's in the audience. I think generally we've agreed with our chair that as members, we don't articulate our views because we are really here as a public reps to listen to the public, right? But I think this is in a way a question to the official from the department, and then possibly the chair or other members could respond, because one of the issues which came up in a previous hearing, I think it was George or Mossel Bay, was, and I think Mr. Moss touched on that issue. We know that currently, in terms of the Constitution, there are 4 tasks. In fact, it says that the Environmental Commissioner must, and I think that's been referred to, monitor urban and rural development, which may impact on the environment. 2, investigate complaints in respect of environmental administration. C, recommend a course of conduct to any provincial organ of state or municipality whose activities have been investigated. That's only a recommendation, obviously. And then finally, and that has been covered, act in accordance with the principles of cooperative government and intergovernmental relations. Now, on the issue of possibly extending the powers or the function, one of the issues that I think many of us, and especially our children, I find, I've got 2 daughters and a son, that they are very concerned about, is the issue of climate change and mitigation of climate change and building resilience. Now, you know, and I think Mr. Moss referred to the Paris Accord, and, you know, at some levels, our government, I believe, nationally has signed into that, and recently the US government under the new president did the same. But I wanted to ask, would sort of an additional power, which I just want to read out as one sentence, would the official have a comment on whether that would be in enhancing any or going against any national or provincial legislation? And for instance, if one added a power, because I take the point on cost, I tend to agree with what Councillor Gorky is saying, penny pound, penny wise, pound foolish, or whatever, however that expression goes. But I know the process of the Children's Commission is being a gradual process. But for instance, if one said that the Commissioner must make proposals to the Western Cape Legislature about a climate change mitigation and resilience strategy, because often when you've got different competing interests, which the alderman referred to, you know, you've got the community, you've got business and developers, you've got government, and so on, and the environment. If you try and get a climate change strategy, you'll have one sector complaining that there cannot be fracking, and then others say, no, there's an advantage to fracking, will it enhance? Whereas if you had, you know, a well-respected, and I think it was said by the Department of Premier that to elect this environmental commissioner, and it takes the politics out of it, because, you know, there's DA today, there could be ANC, there could be Al Jamar tomorrow, you know, so the government, and I take the point that's been raised, but 60% of the legislature, and no one has that majority at this point in time in the legislature, they have to agree on this commissioner, like we had to agree on the Children's Commission. So essentially, if I would sort of, for instance, raise that if you wanted a climate change strategy, someone who's independent but very skilled at the issue, to develop it, maybe you could say, well, government can just put out a tender and ask for a consultant to do it. But I think the advantage of having an ombud, because this is a Chapter 9 institution doing it, because choices have to be made around water, around what kind of development, etc. So I just wanted to ask, the question really is, if you would an amendment, an additional power, such as the Commissioner to make proposals to the Western Cape Legislature about a climate change mitigation and resilience strategy, would that, would I know in the department they've listed particular issues, and then they've, alongside that pointed to national legislation. For instance, in 54, you talk about when the day zero happens, there was a court case, and someone actually quoted there in their court papers that the province's water resources should have been and could have been better monitored and managed had an independent ombudsman for the environment be appointed. And I think that's a moot question, whether that would have happened or not, but you'll see that on page 54, and then there's a response from the department. But Chair, that's basically my question. Is that a power which, in the event of this commissioner being retained and 2/3 of the House saying we agree to add to a power, would that be a power which would raise, from your point of view, any legal or other challenges? Thanks.
Mr. Aip, you want to give a comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Member, for the question. Firstly, the way I understand it is that that power does not exist within the Constitution currently, so it would be have to add it to the Constitution. So it's an amendment of the Constitution again, and to amend the Constitution, there's also that process that you would have to go through. The same process that deals with the appeal will have to deal with the amendment. But that's for the House to decide. We would have to do an analysis in terms of whether it's within now the provincial and not the within the provincial mandate and constitutional mandate, that something like that can happen. So there will have to be some legal analysis that will have to take place in terms of that, and in terms of whether climate change is something that can be the Commission would be able to do, because it's the same like the question that came up in the other hearings is, can the Commission do environmental education? So are we creating another department, I would ask, to do some of those types of functions? And should the Commissioner, how would you deal with the Commissioner then being a duplication of functions that already exist? Now, for climate change, there is already a national climate change white paper which exists, and there's actually a Western Cape climate change strategy which exists as well, and all municipalities are supposed to have climate change adaptation and mitigation plans. So, and the way the system works now, it is obviously reported to the Department of Environmental Affairs, but there is oversight that exists in terms of that. So nationally, there is already the white paper that exists, and then currently within the national draft legislation, there's actually a climate change bill which is currently under consideration as well, which would then also dictate and prescribe what organs of state must do. So the framework legislation is in place. Who you need to do it, I think, is the question that we are asking. But then why is there distrust with? And I understand the distrust from a political point of view, which is what they're saying, and I'm not here to talk politics, but we are representing what exists currently within legislation. So the Constitution would have to be amended. There is currently legislation that deals with climate change matters already. And so we can go down and list the primary pieces of legislation dealing with a number of environmental issues that has been raised. But and in the legislation which the section on the Commission deals with, it's not about additional powers, but it's actually giving effect to the powers that the Commission has at present, and it's defining environmental administration. What does monitor and urban rural development mean? And then also just the last, in terms of current legislation, which we have in the Western Cape, is that in terms of the Land Use Planning Act, and we know that planning is something that transcends the environment. The provincial minister must, and that's on slide 41, must also monitor adaptation and climate change and mitigation on the impact of climate change. So just on that specific item, or issue climate change is covered in legislation, but the legislature will have to decide if they want to add climate change onto that. But yeah, dealing with what they need to do in terms of climate change, because our understanding is that there is a suite of legislative pieces that already deals with that specific environmental aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ayub. And I think actually, Member Dagmar, you flagged now quite a very important point, because I think after we appointed the Children's Commissioner, what we didn't look into, and that's something we as the legislature must take ownership for, is how actually to enhance her powers. Because when I had a meeting with her 2 weeks ago, I've realized there are things that we could have done more to look at the constitution of the Western Cape while we're busy appointing her. And I think this is something that, whether it goes ahead or not, but before you actually appoint that person, is to look at, does the person, does the current legislation fulfill what this person should actually do? And I think that actually triggered me now to invite, because that climate change bill, I presume Mr. Ayub is currently sitting with National Parliament. And we need to get a National Parliament to actually come and do a presentation to us of where that bill is on, or where it sits, so we can see if the commissioner goes ahead or not. Because what you don't want to do is develop a Western Cape climate strategy, but in the meantime, there's actually a national strategy sitting there, because you don't want 30 municipalities in the Western Cape to start appointing 30 people, including environmental commissioner. Then there's a national environmental commissioner. And frankly, based on what the gentleman said, that you can't build that house in Paternoster or anything, because everybody, 30 different people will complain to different environmental officers, and then you're stuck for the next 100 years trying to figure out if this stoop should be 1.2 meters or 1.5 meters. And that's just an example as to what things could happen. Or alternatively, it could go ahead and those 30 environmental officers will agree on it. So I think that's actually quite a very important point, that one should start looking at what other legislations that, if we are drafters of this legislation, that we might enhance, or that we actually might block or might stop. And I think with the Children's Commissioner appointment process, and now that you mention it, I think that is something that we perhaps, now that the commissioner has been appointed, should start, the standing committee should start looking at. So how can we either broaden a scope to include anything else other than the social clusters? Because I think now that you mentioned, in a hurry of appointing the commissioner, we actually, after we enacted the law that appointed or enforced our own law, we didn't look at some of the legislation framework that can actually help the commission. I think this is something that is, for me, is now important coming out of this committee, whether the commissioner goes ahead or not, but we need to look at the roles and responsibilities of that. And I think this is now one other matter that we picked up, and that's why public hearings are so important. Whether one person attend or 100 people attend, you always learn something new. I see the alderman has got a hand up again. Sorry, any other members online? Or sorry, can I quickly just take the members, then we'll come back to you, Mr. Brankes?
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, that the NEMA Act provides for offences and penalties for non-compliance by environmental officials. As far as I know, the NEMA Act provides for penalties severe as much as a 10-year jail sentence for any environmental official that has been prosecuted. If the department can, if they can identify that. And number two is that in the last 10 or 20 years, has any environmental official been prosecuted for any environmental disaster? We know locally in the Western Cape and all around in South Africa, for the last 10 or 20 years, we had many natural or environmental disasters. But has any environmental official been prosecuted to the department? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Aye. You did, yeah. Alderman, do you want to make a question or input?
Thank you, Chair. My comment may not be related to the Commissioner, but I think it's important now that you brought legislation in and also the whole fact of climate change. A good example of how things go wrong is when legislation is made, not taking what is happening at the tacky hit the tar level when making that legislation. Now, this municipality, Saldanha Bay municipality, does have a climate change strategy. It has a lot of strategies in place, but not all those strategies are implementable because the resources are not available. We've gone to a lot of trouble in getting an environmental officer in this municipality, but there are municipalities on the West Coast that don't have an environmental officer. And I think you take mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation in climate change is relatively at no cost. You know, it's how you drive your car and how you do things like that. But adaptation comes at a major cost. And if you just take the Bay into account and how we have to adapt to beach erosion, the costs involved there, although it's not a municipal task because it lies at, but we're still involved in that. So the point I want to make is the legislators must take into account where the resources come from to make this happen on the ground. Just wanted to make that point. It's not relative to the Commissioner, but it's an important point in my mind.
No, it is an important point in any legislation, actually. I mean, you can't do anything without resources, but thank you for emphasizing it. Mr. Ayub?
Thank you, Chair, and to the member. Yes, NEMA does make provision for the penalty provisions as indicated, 10 million in 10 years. It's not only for officials, but also for transgressors of environment out there. To my knowledge, no environmental official within the Western Cape has been prosecuted. Remember, the decision to prosecute does not lie with the department, but that lies with the National Prosecuting Authority. And I've been with the department now for a few years, and my colleague Paul Hardcastle can maybe bear me out in terms of his knowledge, but I'm not aware of that. There has been some court cases in the past where some politicians have been prosecuted or have had to deal with certain matters that were brought up against them in terms of decision making, but not at an official level, but at another level. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Dagmore. Thank you for that. Before you ask, there was someone who was into jail. Yes. Member Dagmore, yeah.
Yeah. No, Chair, I think I just want to take advantage of the fact that there are so many aldermen here and older men as well. But one of the things that probably went unnoticed in the first presentation, and this relates to budget, which I think affects us as MPLs and yourselves as councillors or members of the community. The provincial constitution, and it's not proposed to amend that, but it says that there shall be a provincial act which provides for a procedure to amend a money bill. So in other words, a money bill is basically the budget. So we have a budget in the province, and then you have the adjustment budget, and it's a very similar process to yourselves at the local sphere. But we get very frustrated, well, let me speak for myself, some of us get very frustrated when the executive presents the budget, and then the only thing you can do, you can either vote against it, you can vote for it, or you can abstain. So in other words, in some other democracies, you have a situation where, say, we are, like Member Maxwell Moss was a member of parliament, and he was from Saldanha. So literally what happens is that people say, well, we're looking at what is in this budget for Saldanha, right? And then if the budget looks like this, and they've got, you know, there's a lot of focus on infrastructure development at the moment. So then those MPs would say, hold on, we're not going to adopt this budget unless we see what is in place for George or Saldanha. You know what I'm saying? So that is still a law that we have to pass so that the MPLs are able to, and obviously if you don't have a majority, all you can do is influence. If you do have a majority, even in a majority party, you might, in our case, then have DA members, for instance, saying, you know, there's not enough in this budget, and they might have their own caucuses with their own MEC, or we might try and go, or at the national level, it would be the other way around, where members of parliament from the ANC would say, no, there's nothing for the Eastern Cape Kofimbaba Dam, or, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know where we are at a municipal level, but, and I take the point that, you know, sometimes we pass laws and then how is it practical to implement them? But I think the budget, and that raises the point about resources, it's about choices. You know, you have a budget, you can put up rates, or you can keep rates as they are, and then you can do things, you get transfers. But I think the whole thing about public reps, if we had the ability to amend and interrogate money bills, whether at a provincial or a local level, I think that would help us to develop priorities. I do think, I don't know, Chairperson, you can help, but I understand there is now at a national level a procedure to amend money bills. I don't know how it's working, quite honest, but I don't think any of the provinces at the moment have as far as I know, an act which allows members of the legislatures to amend money bills. But I'm just raising that as a point because ultimately, you know, it would be good if you had, you know, every ward councillor fought for their ward in terms of infrastructure and even lobbied their provincial MPs to say this ward needs a clinic, fight for that in the budget. If you don't get it this, you know what I'm saying? It becomes much more practical. I just wanted to make that point, but it is in the first presentation. You will see there, I think it's section 30. I think it's section 30 that is kept in there's no intention to remove that. That there shall be an act of the province to amend a money bill. I just want to make that point. Thanks.
And I think that is quite an important part of this process and something that, as Member Dagmar said, there is currently a national parliament. In fact, the Gauteng province has a money bill. And it shows how, and I hate to use the word, but how politically sensitive the budget has become, that not even parliaments could change the budget. And during our research, Member Dagmar, and this is not something unique to South Africa. It's something that is unfortunately in democracies, unless you have directly elected MPs or partly based on the new finding, it has always been difficult to influence that process in Parliament itself. I'm not talking the study groups and the political study groups and the party manifestos and what political parties has presented to the constituents, and that ultimately goes into the budget, whoever gets elected. What I'm referring to is whoever is in power at the time, whoever governs at the time, regardless of who governs, whichever political party, the process to change the actual budget allocation. That is something that hasn't been utilized effectively in this country. And I hope through our budget, this process, that we could be the first province to do so effectively. Because it's the one thing to have a law, the other thing is to actually do what the law tells you. And that workshop that we're having in 2 weeks' time, it's a 3-day workshop on the money bill as to how we can change the budget. Like you said, if Saldanha needs a clinic, that Saldanha, when there's a public hearing in the Western Cape Parliament on the budget, the Saldanha arrive with 3 buses full of people and actually come and influence their decision on the clinic. It's something that works very well in the American system, if you know American politics, that a senator will not vote on any particular matter unless you've done something for where he comes from, for the state that he comes from. That's something that works extremely well in American politics, whether you like it or not, but it works very well in their politics, that no one will vote on a budget. That's why you've seen in the recently passed budget last year that anyone who voted on their budget had a portion of what they want in their states in that budget. There was a line item, and I think it was 6,000 pages, that budget item. And many people say, but my senator didn't see what's on page 3,025. He wasn't interested in what's on page 3,025. He wasn't interested in what's on page 4,081 related to his constituency. And that's why he didn't read the other 3,000 pages, because it didn't influence his state, or didn't affect his state. And so I think that's an important piece of legislation that we all will need to, hopefully we all will agree to it, because it's something that's going to affect all of us. So when the next budget cycle comes, that anyone who comes before Parliament can say, actually, you know what, based on our finding, there isn't a new school needed in, let's call it Blikkiesdorp, but there's a new school needed in Papiersdorp, and that's where you should build a school. And I think that's such an important part of the budgetary process that, like I said, has not been effectively used, even in National Parliament, for the last 27 years. I'm not talking in the political process, I'm talking in the public participation process. So when the Minister of Finance stand up at the end of February delivering the budget, it can actually be a budget delivered and corroborated by the Budget Committee of Parliament. Despite the fact that Parliament has a budget office, that budget has not changed any budget that the executive delivered in Parliament on the 20th. The minister comes on the 20th of February, he gave the budget speech, 3-4 weeks later the committee is convened, it comes back, the budget has not changed in any way by any of the NCOP or any of the parliaments, and that is something that has been missing, and we hope that this legislation, which is very part of this bill actually, can affect that. But that's a very important point. There's no further input on the legislation. Just hang on for the mic so we can just record you. And given we now almost close the way, I'm going to give you a maximum of 2 minutes. Okay, thanks.
I'm good in keeping time and goes in class. No, the thing I wanted to know, whether you as people that are coming and present to us like today, have you ever thought of illiterate people? Have you ever thought of the document that is here? You should apply your mind to it so that when you come and talk to us, we are able to respond in the document given. Now you give the document. When I came here in 10 minutes time, I have to ask questions on this document. Is it fair? And then I just want to know from you, because it's been holding, and then at the time that the people shall govern, we thought that we are able to get information, forehand information. So when we come in engagement of this nature, we are able to engage based on the document that we are going to present to us. But is there anyone who can tell us why is it not happening? And but anyway, you want answers from us today, or when you leave here, you say you have consulted us. No, this is not consultation. You come inform us. So there's no input and genuine input that we are getting. I think that is the point I'm trying to make, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's a valid point, and we will. What we have done, and when I started the meeting, we've obviously indicated where we advertised, how we advertised, but I do get your point. So how do we, and it's something that we've actually, last week, I was in a meeting, on a Zoom meeting, and Zoom has brought the privilege that we can attend meetings globally. And one of the gentlemen was advisor to the Swedish Prime Minister, the other one was the MP for Europe, for the Social Democrats, and the second one was the MP in Norway. And part of the concerns, because we were talking about the public participation process and what keeps people away from the public participation process. And based on the fact that the people there, and we obviously from the Western Cape, and one was the national MP, is that the documentation, like you said, that during the public participation process, and they were talking about the European budget, for example, becomes so technical that people don't feel the need to come to public hearings. And based on the input that you've said, is something that we have taken into account. We do have a public outreach office whose role and responsibility is to come to public hearings before the public hearing, to brief the community specifically around legislation, so that the community members come to a public meeting, they know exactly what the legislation is about. There should be workshops on that, and we should enhance that much more. And in fact, we should, part of that new budget legislation is how do we get more public outreach officers, so that when we come here today, 2 days before the time, or 3, or even a week before the time, they should be in the communities. Obviously, COVID is now a different setup. And one of the resolutions here is literally on the table, is that we send community members' data, because they can access the Cape Access Centers, so they can log in from their phones, so that they are educated to say, oh, this is the legislation around X, Y, and Z. This is my view on this legislation. I can WhatsApp it. So to make this thick document, like you said, to make it more easy to understand in a language that people understand. So it's a valid point that you made, and I really appreciate it, actually, that you made it as well. It's something that we need to take on. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for your input. Is there any comments from members online? Nothing so far to Mr. Ahmad and your colleague. Thank you very much. You needed to respond to the question from Member Brunke. Sorry,
I already responded to Member Brunke's, but if I can just respond to Member Dagmo's.
Oh, yes, Member. Okay, yeah, please.
Just a way of the new annual performance plan formats has actually got an annexure at the back now. Each department must indicate in terms of the district development model what you will be doing in a particular district. So you would then be able to see from a non-financial point of view. I think we're moving towards the financial point of view, what we want, but you would then be able to see where the department's money is going in specific areas and in specific districts. So if you have a look at the APPs, the current version APPs, that model is now being imposed on us by National Treasury so that you can see the spatial distribution of funding and where departments are spending their money. So, and that is something new that has been included now. Thanks.
Tea and coffee at the back. Thank you to members of the public. There's tea and coffee at the back, and given the COVID-19 regulations, there's snack packs. Please do take them with you. Seeing that there's not a lot of people here, please take 2 or 3. Give to people on the road that needs it. There's always people who needs it. I'd rather have that happen than the stuff go old here. So thank you for coming again. We do appreciate your input. Members, can we take a 5-minute relax stretch? Then we'll come back to continue with the rest of the work. Thank you. Where did Member Dagmar go? Start. Resolutions from this meeting. Okay, the meeting is reconvening. We do have a quorum. We're just waiting on Member Dagmar, but we have, say, 5 minutes, and the 5 minutes has lapsed, so the meeting will start. If you can just ask members of the public just to keep it a little bit down at the back, please. Sergeant of Arms, you can just assist us there. The meeting standing committee of the Premier and constitutional matters are reconvening, and we're just going to resolutions of the meeting. Given what we've heard on Member Dagmar on climate change, I would like to propose that we do invite the National Department on the Climate Change Bill to come to the committee, and during this public participation process, and just invite our colleagues to come and share that with us. We will find a date on the parliamentary process. Are you in agreement with that, members? For the record, Member Mitchell.
I agree, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. We agree.
Thank you. Members, we also have received an email from Member Lorraine Botha, which I will read into the record, where she does, and it was previously mentioned as well by Member Dagmar and some others, about public participation during the process, and that we've so far only come to Saldanha, and that the West Coast also includes Van Reinsdorp, Vredendal, Glenwilliam, Graafwater, Lambertswaai, and several others. The letters will be sent for the record. And it is a valid concern that the member raised that we only came so far into the West Coast. And I know Member Mitchell verbally also expressed concern the Central Karoo wasn't covered during this public participation process. And I'd like to suggest an additional 3 meetings on this public participation process. I will work with administration to see if it gets done, but I just need the concurrence from this committee over the next few months that we do include more meetings in the public participation process, including, like we previously agreed to, inviting the National Minister, and Minister Brodell also agreed to come and address the meeting, and then we also will include Member Brankhuis.
Thank you, Chair. On that, Chair, if we can include the City of Cape Town, a public participation meeting for the City of Cape Town, and specifically the Sunflay area near Makassa, Ward 109. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Because of the area being affected by environmental issues over the last 10-20 years, I think that a public participation process in the area of Sunflay that has been highly impacted and severely impacted by environmental affairs, that will be welcome, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will include additional public hearings as per the input given. We will work out with administration what needs to be done. And then on the other point is, do you have concurrence on that?
Chair, in order.
Yeah. Member Dagmar, there was just concerns around the public and Member Prunk about the public participation process. And I think I know you raised it previously. And that we, in fact, we received a formal letter from Member Botha that the West Coast doesn't stop in Saldanha. So we'll need to relook as to how we can accommodate that. But the bigger point is on the public participation process, the public outreach office. And I want the committee, with a concurrence, that I will write to the Speaker to get that the public participation outreach, and I'll frame it properly, but I just want to get the sentiment that before we do public hearings, that they need to go out, COVID-19 taking into account, if 3 or 4 days before the time, work in our communities, inform them what the legislation is allowed, loud hailing if they need be. We know how to do it. We've done it during political rallies. If they need assistance from the local councillors, obviously it's a non-political message, but that when we do go out to public hearings, that the halls do get, if not filled out, but there is appropriate mechanism. If a seasoned alderman express concern over his understanding of the legislation, then clearly we need to do much more, and that is our responsibility. So that will become part of my communication to the speaker, that we do feel that on our next public hearings, before that they need to go out, the public outreach officers, taking into account COVID-19 obviously regulations, but they educate our communities and ensure that we are coming, and they need to make the necessary in all 3 languages of this province to ensure that our people are adequately briefed on this legislation. If it needs to come to us first so we can see the script, the message script, and so be it. But I think it's important, and that should be applicable, in fact, to all legislation going forward, because that our communities are properly informed in a language they understand what the legislation is about and how it will impact them. Because any legislation, whether it passes or not, or whether it is approved or not, repealed or not, does have an effect on every person living in this province. And I think that is the message that needs to become clear. And I would like us to include that as well in our resolutions going forward.
Yeah, no, Chair, definitely.
Member Doug.
I'd like to support that communication with the speaker. I think also maybe because we've been in COVID for so long, we've forgotten that sometimes what we've done, I remember with those education hearings, we also actually, if there were people from our constituency that needed transport, like say we had Mossel Bay and George, and I say if Neisner wanted to come, or Hessequa, or whatever the case may be. So in that advanced team, they could also, not only mobilize and inform people, but then, look at the possibility of transport. The other way with the COVID is because transport can also cost money, obviously, to get people here. But this idea of if someone confirms their interest and attendance, the issue of providing them with data. So is that down there? Yeah. Okay, so we could then, look at those methods. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got that as well. I thank you to Masima, that the committee, also part of the resolution, we need to establish with ICT how much data will be needed. But so when the public outreach officers go out, they need to inform our community members, if you can't come there physically, we can give you data on the day. And I don't know how they're going to do it, but they have to figure it out. I'm sure they can, to ensure that they can log into this meeting. Yes, so the committee resolved as part of the resolution that we are going to provide data and ask IT department to ensure that the relevant mechanism needs to be in place to make this happen. We don't know how, we're not going to give them prescribed way, but they need to ensure that it does happen. Yes. No, we're going to do some hearings after the Wales Street hearings. Yeah. Anything else, members? Thank you. Wasima will find in the wording. But thank you, members. We need this meeting's adjourned. Thank you, members online. My coordinators, Wayne, Ms. Wendy, and the team online, everybody that made this public hearing successful. We really appreciate your help. Now it's time to get back to your family.